Hi everyone, Rudy here, and welcome to my Whirlwind Barb guide. This is one of the strongest solo builds in the game right now, and definitely the strongest build for Barbarians. And I've been pushing Barbarian a little bit this season, so currently I'm working on tier 140 solo, and I've come really close to that already. And I just wanted to share this guide with you now. So you have to know that Season 20 allows you to change the setup a little bit, but I'll cover the Season 20 setup and I'll also cover the non-season setup. And they are very similar, and there's just like a few things to change around essentially. So this is the setup. We have the waist set, which buffs Whirlwind and Rend. You have to know that Whirlwind does absolutely 0 damage in the setup. It's all coming from Rend. And the way this works is that Amber's Pride automatically applies a Rend when you Whirlwind through an enemy. And Rend will deal its total damage over 1 second. So you have to continuously whirl through enemies to actually deal damage. But it's not the Whirlwind, it's the Rend that does the damage. In addition to the set and the weapon, we also have the Lamentation belt that buffs Rend and allows it to be applied twice. So this means that you have to do 2 applications every second to deal maximum DPS. Some other key items are the Mortix Brace that buffs Wrath the Berserker to give you all runes. This is very nice because Wrath the Berserker is permanently up with Ring of the Zodiac. And like this you get a huge damage and defensive buff that you don't want to miss. We have Flavor of Time, which is simply the best amulet choice here. You can't use Endless Walk, you can't use Squirts, so this is the amulet you're going to use, and it's going to make insane conduits, because we also have Rage Flip in the build. With Rage Flip you can control enemies, you can control pulls, and the general strategy is that when you're pushing, you have to go for the good maps, the open maps, and get a conduit if you want to compete with other Barbarians. A lot of the power level from this build comes from the conduits, because you have so much control with Rage Flip that conduits are ridiculous. You can do like 50% progress with a conduit, and this is kind of like factored into the strength of the build. So you know, the build itself is strong, it's definitely good, but when you push really high, it comes down to having a like 5-6 pack conduit. And the conduit is much more important on Barb than on any other class because of Flavor plus Rage Flip combo. To stay alive, you have Band of Might. Band of Might has a 80% damage reduction proc for 8 seconds after you ground stomp. So you use ground stomp to get up the buff and also to group enemies. And you want to use it 2 or 3 times per convention cycle. Convention cycle is 16 seconds, Band of Might is 8 seconds. So with good timing, you can do it exactly twice. But generally, I recommend to do it 3 times. Or for example, you could alternate it with you know, 1 cycle where you do 2 stomps and another cycle where you do 3 to like get the timings right again. The last 2 skills on our bar are Battle Rage and Rend. So with Whirlwind and Battle Rage, there are 2 different setups possible here. Both skills have a rune that gives you insane healing, and you can use either of them to get your recovery, but you need one of them. So it can be either the Swords to Plowshares on the Battle Rage, or it can be the Whirlwind Blood Funnel. But you have to know that the Whirlwind Blood Funnel only really works if you get Fury another way. Because typically you use Swords to Plowshares to get all your healing, and then you have the Whirlwind to get all your rage. But if you use the Into the Fray on Battle Rage, you can get a lot more damage, but you have to get the heal from the Whirlwind, and then you have to get a Fury another way. And typically this is only possible when you have a mighty weapon equipped with Amber's Pride. You can do that, and then you have to use the Weapon Mastery passive. And like this, you can boost your damage a bit, and especially in Season 20, this is a very strong setup right now because of the Kana's Cube bonus. But it is also possible to play this on non-season if you want. And finally, for Rend on your bar. So you want to use the Bloodbath rune, which is a physical rune, and you keep it on your bar for 2 reasons. First of all, your Amber's Pride will apply the runed Rend when you have it on your bar. So this is very nice because the rune effect is extremely strong, especially against like small enemies. You get these big explosions. And second of all, you want to cast Rend manually on higher tiers. The reason to do that is it procs area damage, which otherwise doesn't happen when Amber's Pride applies it. So when you're speed farming and doing T16 or lower tiers, it's totally fine to just Whirlwind around, but on higher tiers you do rely on area damage. And the way to make this work is you whirl around for like a split second, then you press Rend once or twice if you can, and like this you get like you know, like a split second of Rend that is like manually applied before you override it again with Amber's Pride. So every time you hit an enemy with Rend manually or with Whirlwind, you will override the other Rends on the target. But there can be 2 stacks, so generally you need like 2 ticks of Whirlwind to override your manual Rends. So most of the time you can have your manual runs up on the targets, and like this you can deal insane area damage. This is also the reason why this build works so well on the higher tiers, because you have enough time to make pulls, to apply the area damage. You have the ground stomp to group stuff really tightly together, and like this you can get insane value from your area damage, even though you constantly override your manual runs anyway. The added bonus is that you also get more Zodiac procs when you Whirlwind and press Rend in between, and you can reset your cooldowns a little bit faster this way. Typically for your cooldown values, you're aiming for something like 40 to 45% cooldown reduction with Zodiac. And if you feel like you're really struggling with cooldown, you can take the Boon of Blockaders passive. But if you have like perfect cooldown rolls everywhere, you don't necessarily need it. But overall, I would recommend it until you're really comfortable with the build. The big bonus the build gets from Season 20 are the Focus and Restraint Rings. This works with Ground Stomp plus Whirlwind or Rend, so you get both the bonuses and you have a nice damage boost like this. And typically you wear a Convention plus Band of Might and you keep the Obsidian Ring, because this one has the worst stats. And you lose a little bit of damage from this, but you get the Mantle of Channeling in the cube, which gives you more damage reduction, a little bit damage. And you can also go with the Istvan's Blades that give you another like nice damage boost and some armor. So typically for non-season or for future seasons, the build is a little bit tankier, but weaker for the higher tiers. And I would say that the Season 20 buff gives the build around 3 tiers or so. For speed farming tier 16 and lower tiers, you can also use the Blockaders weapons instead of Istvans or the Amber's Pride setup. And this gives you a very easy Fury regeneration. It gives you some movement speed, which helps for really fast runs. And it's also like more noob friendly, I'd say. So when you're just learning the setup, this can definitely help you. But for the higher tiers, you definitely want to go with the other setups. So now for the gameplay. You want to make sure that your Band of Might is always up, because you're going to get one shot without it. So make sure you don't miss the 8-second timer of your Band of Might. And typically, because you're playing around convention cycles, you do most of your damage doing physical convention. So you want to make sure that you ground stomp at the last second of lightning to group everything up around you. And then this is where you do most of the damage. You spam Rend once or twice. It's either or, depending on how easy it is to survive for you right now, because in certain monster combos, certain elite combos, it can be very tough to survive even a second without the healing from your skills. So typically when it's very dangerous, I only Rend once, Whirlwind a bit, Rend once again, Whirlwind a bit, and Rend once again. But when it's easy to survive, you can also do Whirlwind, Rend, Whirlwind, Rend, and so on. And like this, you can squeeze out a little bit more area damage from your Rends. And this is how you deal most DPS. You have to make sure that your Taeguk doesn't drop. It's only a 1.5 second timer before the stacks drop. So this means you can do exactly 2 casts of Rend, and then you have to Whirlwind again to not let the buff drop. Or for example, when you do Ground Stomp, make sure you don't Rend twice immediately. You can only Rend once, because when you Ground Stomp and Rend right after, you have to Whirlwind to not let the stacks drop. Also make sure that your Wrath of the Berserker doesn't drop. Without it, you lose like 2/3 of your toughness from the damage reduction rune and the dodge and so on, and you really want to avoid that. So keep an eye out. It's a 20-second duration, and you don't want to press it whenever it's ready, because that's a waste of Zodiac procs. So generally you want to use it, very closely before it runs out. So, but yeah, this is like one of the key things here. The Band of Might plus the Wrath of the Berserker gives you all your toughness, and if without it, you're gonna die. So be careful about that. Also, when you happen to die and your Wrath of the Berserker is on cooldown, try to play carefully. At least get a Band of Might up immediately with the Ground Stomp, and then whirl around a bit, maybe try to flip some stuff, and eventually you get some Zodiac procs to reset the cooldown again. Also, when you die or when you start a rift, you want to press Battle Rage immediately when you can, and you also want to keep doing that every 1 to 2 minutes, because it's 120 seconds duration, so it will run out a couple times throughout the run. Just make sure you press it once in a while and you're fine. Now for Rage Flip. Rage Flip is your most important skill to control enemies and move them around. And you have to know that with the crowd control rules in the game, you can flip a target exactly twice before it becomes immune to it. And then you have to wait 4 seconds and you do another flip. And after that, it's every 8 seconds you can do 1 flip. So you have to be really careful about when and where to flip. And the Rage Flip works in a way that you flip the target through you on the other side opposite of you. So when it's far away, it will also be flipped far away on the opposite side of you. When it's close to you, it will be flipped very close to you on the opposite side, and so on. And this means that when there's targets blocking the destination of where the enemy would end up, it will not be moved, or it will be moved very little. So you have to be careful about the direction you're flipping, and if there's anything behind you that would block the enemy that you want to flip. So you want to usually flip stuff in kind of like a zigzag pattern, where you go a little bit to the left, flip a bit, you go a little bit to the right, flip a bit, and then you have like stuff all around you. And then before you nuke, you do the ground stomp to stomp it all together in one little pull. And this is when you can start doing damage. So in between your convention cycles, you have something like 10 seconds to make a pull, or move everything a little bit further throughout the rift. Then do the next ground stomp, do the next physical rotation, and then after physical rotation, you move out again. Typically, I try to avoid doing the ground stomp in the middle of the pull when I'm not nuking. So I move out after the physical rotation and then do the ground stomp on nothing, so that I don't apply crowd control resistance. And this allows me to flip targets from the previous pull a little bit further ahead. So I do like 2 or 3 flips, another ground stomp, do another 2 or 3 flips, and then I prepare the next convention cycle. So the build is essentially very much like a support barb in solo, and you have to be really good at making pulls. So this is something that actually is like the high skill requirement in the setup, I'd say. And if you can do that well, you can really see the results with a lot more DPS, a lot more progress, even on higher tiers. And then eventually, as I mentioned, you need the conduits. So this is where half of your progress comes from, essentially, when you're doing like the really high pushes. So more than any other build, you do rely on the good maps like Festering Woods and Battlefields, and you have to get the conduits if you want to compete. But generally, it's still a really strong build. And yeah, it works very well regardless, and you have nice control over enemies, and this definitely makes it very fun to play as well. On Rift Guardians, you don't really have to do much. You just have to keep your buffs up and whirl around a bit, and you don't have to do the manual runs there because there's no area damage. You could do it if you have like way too much fury, but generally it should be fine as long as you have good cooldown and maybe Boon of Blockaders passive. You should be able to keep up your Wrath permanently and your Band of Might permanently, and yeah, you're gonna be okay. But if you have trouble with Fury a bit, especially with the Amber's Pride setup with Weapon Master and Into the Fray, it's a little bit harder to keep up your Fury. And especially on single target, you might run out of Fury. So you try to stomp as much as possible to get a little bit of Fury. You can also take some damage on purpose on Rift Guardians, for example, because that also gives you some Fury. And like this, you can also wear around without too much trouble. I included all the free planner links in the description, so check them out for the exact item rolls that you want to go for. And I hope this guide helps you a bit and you liked it, and I'll see you guys next time.